So good to see a full house, a robust congregation on Easter morning. This is great. Welcome to our visitors, those who've never been here before. Anybody here for the first time into St. Columbus? Great, many of you. That's wonderful. We're real honored to have you with us to celebrate the resurrection. I was having dinner with good friends last night and realized I didn't have my sermon ready. I said I probably should go home and get ready for the sermon. And they said, well, you're familiar with the theme. We've done this before. Yes, I am. I am familiar with this theme. And we've done this before, but you know, we have to rediscover it anew every year. Let's never take this Easter message for granted. It's a theme that should be so woven into the fabric of our lives that it brings a deep sense of joy every time we think of it, but particularly when we gather on resurrection morning. This week, we've lost a global landmark, at least much of it, the Notre Dame Cathedral. We watched in horror as it burned, and we were glued to our TV seeing what did they save, which artifacts were salvaged, and we're grateful for many of the wonderful things that were salvaged. $1 billion has been raised, right? Or so, give or take a few dollars to start the rebuilding. And we want to see it rebuilt. But it sure reminded me of how temporal our cathedrals are, how vulnerable our places of worship are. And then it reminded me of how eternal is the cathedral of praise. After all, the scriptures teach us that that's what God inhabits. God inhabits the praises of his people. God doesn't inhabit the buildings. God's not here in the candles or the altar or my stole or my prayer book. God's not even in the Bible. God inhabits the praises of God's people. That's what the scriptures teach us. And you can't tear that down. Eternal for all generations is the cathedral of praise. And on Easter morning particularly, all over the world, we're entering into that wonderful cathedral to give praise to a mighty God who not only showed power but demonstrated eternal love. And that love dwells in our hearts. For many of us, it's a very personal time, and for me, it's always about my mom. My mother was born on April 24th, and she died about 5 years ago. It was the hardest death in my life to let go of someone. But she was always my Easter person. She was the one who said every Easter morning before any other word, Christ is risen, and everybody in the family would have to faithfully respond, he is risen indeed. Then we could have our breakfast. And off to church we went. Those were the good old days when we went to church dressed up, right? My mom wearing her, what do you call those things? The hat. Yeah, the hat. White gloves. My mother and sister, white gloves, and the guys all dressed up. And Dad even went to church with us. That was a great treat. But my mom comes back to me, and probably for you, Easter brings back special people. I had a dream 2 nights ago of my mom, and it was one that I'll always remember. She was in a field of yellow flowers. She was younger. It was before she even dyed her hair blonde, so she was very young, probably in her 20s, early 20s. And she was twirling around in the flowers, the yellow flowers, but over her was a towering oak, a mighty oak tree. And I woke up with such joy at the image of my mother in eternal happiness. Isn't that the joy of Easter for you, that someone you have loved and lost has that hope? So take a moment this morning on Easter to recall those times of sorrow, because they also bring times of great joy. And that's what Easter is all about. It's the mixing of sorrow with the triumph of joy. I've been taken the last few days. I've had a real privilege. I've been here since Thursday night. I don't usually get to stay up here that long, but In the woods around Fawnskin and maybe other places, I'm sure in Big Bear, there's been the voice of a sparrow. I think it's a sparrow because I'm no, what's that word?
Ornithologist.
Ornithologist. So I've had to rely on YouTube.
I've been hearing morning doves.
Morning doves. Morning doves.
Lots of chickadees.
Maybe it's a chickadee, but look at all these budding ornithologists. It's a very simple song. It's only 3 notes. It goes, 3 blind mice.
That's a chickadee.
It's a chickadee.
It's a chickadee.
Yes.
It's a chickadee, and it says that there's no prey. Nobody's trying to eat it.
Nobody's trying to eat it?
Safe.
Yeah, it's their
Well, what does
safety.
it mean when it goes,
Well, I don't know.
This-
Still the other
Just talking to you.
it changes it up, it changes it up, and then it goes, changes it up. How many notes? 3. It only has 3 notes, but it does everything it can with those 3 notes. You sure it's a chickadee?
Yes.
Well, that just ruined my sermon. Because I was sure it was a sparrow. And I was going to tell you how important sparrows are to God. Maybe chickadees are too. Because after all, Matthew says, are not 2 chickadees sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. I'm saying that because each of us has something to sing. Some song to offer to God, our Creator. It may seem limited. What if you only had 3 notes? You'd try to do everything you could with those 3 notes, wouldn't you? You'd find every variation in the world to make those 3 notes give praise to your Creator, to give thanks for the gift of life. Don't ever run out of a song. Don't ever doubt that your song isn't big enough. Maybe it's very limited, and maybe particularly right now you're going through a really hard time, and it seems like your options are severely cramped. There are times in our life when it seems big and large, doesn't it? And then there are times in our life when it seems very small and constricted. And so for those of you this morning in those small and constricted places, remember the voice of the chickadee. 3 simple notes. But you can do everything you can possibly do with those 3 notes to remember the joy of your Creator. What else can you do? Go into the woods and listen to the sound of the wind going through the pine trees. If that doesn't cleanse your soul. Watch a sunset over this lake. And there are some good ones, aren't there? Wow, we live in a place with amazing sunsets. Breathe in the fresh air when you go out of the church today and give thanks for the gift of breath. Embrace a friend or feel the embrace of a friend and know that that touch is a gift of God. Share a meal at a table. How many of you will be with friends or family today sharing a meal? There you go. Have a lick from your dog. Done. That will teach you right. That will wake you up. Life is rising to meet you. Jesus said, the risen Christ says, behold, I make all things new. And so the spirit of Easter is to enter into that gift of newness and to say, I may only have three notes. That's all I've got, but what am I going to do with them? I'm going to sing it until the whole world hears it. Everybody's going to know my song. Don't doubt it. We're so blessed to live in a time and a place where we can gather and have this freedom to sing these glorious hymns. But when you leave here, you're stuck with your 3 notes. And so I implore you to find joy and grace in those 3 notes And if you're in a constricted place, to know that those 3 notes count to God. Because after all, what did it say? Not a single chickadee falls to the ground apart from its father. You are of more value than all the chickadees. Amen.
Invite all children to come up forward. We have some children in the audience. Is there anybody else? I think there's. Come on up. You don't have. Come on up. Don't be shy. Hello. Welcome. Hello. How are you? So today is Easter, right? Do you know what the sign language is for Jesus? You? No? Let me teach you. Jesus, the sign language is this and that. This and that. Do you know why we have that as a sign language? Think about it. What went into Jesus' hands? Nails. Right, so when he was on the cross, the nails went in his hands. So this is the sign. Yeah. So what is the sign for Jesus resurrected? Jesus is risen. You don't know? Okay, so the resurrection, hand out. So it's like a little person with feet, okay? And then it goes up like this spiral of smoke. Okay, so if we were to do Jesus is risen, let's put it together. I'm going to have you put it together. Can you put it together for me? I think you can. Perfect! Your turn. There you are. So now you've learned something, right? So you have some sign language. So what if you said Jesus is so good? How would you do that? That's right. I like it. That works. See, there you go. So, but you can also go, Jesus is so good. So this is good, and this is so. But I like that. I don't know that. All right. Have a very blessed Easter. Thank you for coming.